Dalamadur is the final boss of Monster Hunter 4. He's one of the biggest elder dragons in the entire series, being a giant snake that resides high in the mountains at Speartip Crag. Dalamadur so far is exclusive to Monster Hunter 4 and its expansion. This perhaps is due to his giant size, but also the way he's designed, being a scripted colossal set-piece boss, which is uncommon for the Monster Hunter series, especially today. To understand Dalamadur, you first have to understand the layout of his arena, Speartip Crag. It features a tall spire, 3 flat elevated platforms of different sizes, in addition to a shorter spire. The platforms are connected to the shorter spire, which is climbable, and while parts of the larger spire are scalable, you cannot ordinarily reach or scale it. There are also 3 small pits that contain a mysterious blue substance that burns you and taps your health. Every Dalamadur battle begins with an introduction cutscene where one or more hunters are wandering Speartip Crag. The Serpent King Dragon eventually appears and coils himself around the larger spire, and after observing his new foes, lets out a tremendous roar. As such, he begins every fight coiled around the larger spire, with his tail waving behind the lower platform at the other end of the arena. I will refer to this as position 1. He does not stay here long and immediately roars before taking off as his giant body begins to move. Dalamadur's face can actually knock you back during this, but otherwise you won't take any damage by staying in contact and can even get some free hits in, although it's not particularly worth it. While moving from this position, his giant back spike becomes vulnerable, allowing you to strike it. Dalamadur will soon coil himself below and over the large central platform, with his arms resting on the ground and his tail lingering all the way on the other side of the arena next to the smaller spire, in what I will refer to as position 2. Here he begins to actively attack you, either by swiping his right claw on the lower platform, launching a mysterious blue fireball with surprising accuracy, or by backing up and performing a massive bite attack, where his entire head rapidly moves towards you. His tail will be adjacent to the smaller spire and will actively attack anyone next to it. After performing any attack, he'll reset to his normal position, and after some time he'll move over to position 3, where his body is arched next to the second spire, with his right arm resting on top of the spire and his left on the main platform with his head on the side. His tail is now back at position 2 and will once again freely attack. It's important to mention that every time Dalamadur moves to and from positions 2 and 3, meteors will fall from the sky, and they interestingly resemble his own fireballs. They strike near you at random, with light rays revealing when and where they'll fall. In position 3, Dalamadur can perform the same attacks again, a claw swipe, fireball, tail strike, and of course a bite. But after enough time has passed, he will rapidly disappear below Speartip Crag, entirely out of sight. He'll soon reappear with a massive bite attack from a different angle, once again moving fast. This time, however, he stops and rests after biting, which allows for hunters to freely attack his head for a brief time before he pulls away. He then resets back to position 1, coiled around the spire. At this point he'll stay there for longer, and his body will become climbable. Hopping on will prompt Dalamadur to destroy part of the initial platforms. So begins phase 2. The music shifts, and for the duration of the fight, Dalamadur will send meteors down for longer, actively become enraged with glowing red veins, and gains new attacks. Climbing on Dalamadur's back allows you to either reach his back spike or the spire itself, and climbing that will allow you to jump aboard his very head, provided it has been broken once already. From position 1, Dalamadur can either strike with his tail or launch a fireball, and depending on where you are on the spire, it can still hit you. After he's finished there, however, he can go to either 2 or 3. While enraged, his chest area glows and causes heat damage, constantly draining your health, which makes attacking his lower arm or chest spike much more dangerous. In addition to this, after disappearing below the crag, he will re-emerge with his most infamous attack, the Super Laser. It's massive, and he sweeps it across the arena, with the only way to avoid it being to either climb on the second spire or perform a Superman dive. It's not a guaranteed one-shot, but it can devastate those with rank-appropriate armour. After another loop, climbing on top of Dalamadur will prompt him to use his tail in order to carve out a gorge between the central platforms and Spire 2, which makes travelling between the two much harder. Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate introduced a post-game subspecies, Shah Dalamadur. Unlocked by deciphering enough ancient texts, Shah's quest begins with an alternate cutscene where hunters stumble across a petrified Dalamadur. Not long after, he wakes up and begins to shed his scales, rapidly losing them and revealing a gold and red coloration beneath. Shah wastes zero time in beginning to attack any hunting party, and the fight begins in position 2. Shah's biggest differences are that by default, his spikes and claws are hardened, causing all attacks to bounce off. Eventually, however, he can heat himself up, which softens them while granting the ability to heat up parts of the ground with his claw and bite attacks. He also sends down far more meteors, especially late into the fight. Shah Dalamadur starting in position 2 also gives his fight slightly different patterns in terms of where he goes next, and he'll often shoot a fireball while simultaneously attacking with his tail. Aside from all that, he's not too different from the standard Dalamadur in terms of pacing, attacks or structure, outside of what I have listed. After the creation of the Gorge, both Dalamadurs will end both positions 2 and 3 by dropping below Spear Tip Crag and performing 2 different super lasers, both from entirely different positions. After the second, they will once again remain stationary, but if enraged, will perform one last bite attack before remaining still, allowing you another free attack opportunity. They'll then reset back to position 1. Despite being colossal titan set pieces, the Dalamadur duo do have standard Monster Hunter features. Dealing enough damage can cause them to flinch, for instance, which is useful for interrupting their attacks. His tail can also be severed, allowing you to carve it. You can also break different parts of theirs, such as both sets of claws, the chest spike and back spikes, and doing so will cause Dalamadur to fall down on the floor, allowing a free attack opportunity. Granted, if you're on top of Dalamadur when this happens, you'll likely fall off Spear Tip Crag and into the base camp. Dalamadur's head can be broken twice. The first break is necessary in order to climb aboard Dalamadur's head when he's in position 1. From here, you can either carve for extra materials or simply attack, as this spot is a massive weak point, and will certainly allow for a knockdown. Dalamadur can't be mounted like most other monsters, but performing jumping attacks against his head will often provide the same result, and cause him to be knocked down for a while, although this gets less and less effective the more you do it. Another fun detail is that Dalamadur's meteors will rarely fail to explode, and will simply remain on the ground. If you brought along a pickaxe, you can mine for shattered omens, which are critical for forging Dalamadur's gear. Oh, here's another important ability. Both Dalamadurs flick their tongues out sometimes. If you make contact with it, you'll be paralysed. Both Dalamadurs will enter their final phase after enough damage has been dealt by disappearing below Spear Tip Crag, re-emerging around Spire 2, wrapping themselves around it, and then totally collapsing the whole thing, crushing it with their bodies, and causing it to sink below the clouds, thus eliminating position 3 from the fight entirely. Following this, they'll perform one last trip to position 1 before spending the remainder of the fight in position 2, performing all their regular attacks at faster intervals. Both Dalamadurs can be killed, and upon death they can be carved 4 times on 2 different points of their bodies, totaling to 8. With only a minute, you need to be extremely quick about it. Dalamadur's armour resembles that of a traditional knight. It's silver and decorated with dark spikes that resemble those of the serpent dragon. You can also hear the sounds of chainmail as they run. The Blade Master armour is known as Rebellion, while the Gunner is Riot. In terms of armour skills, they're rather strange. There is only one complete skill, known as Fury, which combines the skills Guts and Adrenaline. It does have some points for Ruthlessness, Resilience, Team Leader, Avarice, Nimbleness, and finally the skill Edgemaster. All of these are combined skills that would be very helpful if they added up to something complete, but they don't. The set even has Attack Down, which stinks. Perhaps this armour was supposed to be used for mixed sets, but as a complete set, it's quite bad. This is also true for G rank. Here the male blade design has a spiky cape and a horned helmet that conceals the face. The female blade design, however, is vastly different from normal, and is much more exposed in a way I don't think looks particularly good. The Gunner designs are more traditional, however, and still look good. There's also the Dalamadur EX set, with the Blade Masters leaning even more into the traditional knight aesthetic, with chainmail and emblems embroidered onto a tunic. The Gunner armours are cloaked with hoods, with their face concealed. It's such a shame that 4 Ultimate doesn't have layered armour, because these look fantastic. Shah Dalamadur's armours are recolours of the G rank sets, and are white with red spikes, to reflect the Shah himself. This armour is far more robust in terms of skills, including Punishing Draw, Awaken, and Status Resistance. However, it has negative experts which lowers your affinity. The Gunner armour has Rapid Fire instead of Punishing Draw. Dalamadur's weapons are incredible visually. His greatsword is a giant back spike, wrapped in chains. The longsword is a short blade that extends when unsheathed. The sword and shield are both covered in different spikes, with the sword having his back spikes, and the shield being decorated with the smaller ones. The dual swords are like 2 giant twin claws. The hammer is coiled up similar to Dalamadur in position 1, and it actually rotates when unsheathed. The hunting horn resembles Dalamadur's face. The lance has a spiky shield, while the spear itself is comprised of 6 large spikes with a central one that juts out when unsheathed. The gun lance looks similar but with a circular shield. The switch axe has back spikes but heavily sharpened and decorated with even more spikes. The charged blade is similar. I'm sure you're getting the gist of it by now. This is true of both the insect glaive and the light bowgun, but the heavy bowgun not only has a sharp design, but 2 spinning circle gears on either side, as well as a saw blade at the bottom. Shah Dalamadur's weapons are similar, but with the gold and red coloration scheme reflected. While Dalamadur's weapons often deal unawakened paralysis, Shah's can deal that as well as blast. Dalamadur's armor descriptions are extremely interesting, even by Elder Dragon standards. The descriptions for the Rebellion armor read as though some greater power has granted the armor to you, maybe Dalamadur himself. The riot's gear also speaks in second person, but also as a collective. Repel all those who wish us harm, guard thy life, guard thee from calamity. His G-rank gear tells you to be honoured, be proud, be blessed, exalted as the conqueror of the serpent, ruler of heaven and earth, shaker of the air and the sky, while the riot's gear describes you as the living legend for overcoming Dalamadur. I displayed his weapon names earlier. They too more or less praise, reassure, and practically worship you for taking down Dalamadur, but their names are interesting. Barwell the Swift, Oda the Conqueror. It's tricky to tell what the unifying theme is for this naming scheme. The lance is named Ethelred the Ready. Historically, there was a king of England called Ethelred the Unready, who lived from 968 to 1016. He became king at 10 years old when his father was killed, and was at one point conquered by Denmark. He was able to take his crown back, but died later and his son lost the throne once again. So is the theme about failed rulers? The gun lance is named Ethelbald the Dire, after another king of England who this time was killed by his bodyguards in the year 757. The others were more unclear, but I later found out that the hunting horn, Orgueil the Insane, might have been named after a meteorite that fell in the town of Orgueil, France. A basic Google search of Krasnoyarsk, as in the light bowgun Krasnoyarsk the Mad, turned out to be a city in Siberia. Lo and behold, a 700kg meteorite once fell here. The Great Sword, Wold the Just, is named after the largest meteorite to ever fall in England, in a place called Wold Newton in Yorkshire. A search for the longsword's namesake, Barwell the Swift, brought up a village in Leicestershire that was struck by a meteor shower in 1965. Then I hit a roadblock with Vaka the Maze Lord, aka the Sword and Shield, and decided to see what others had found on the subject. And someone else had looked into it, 11 years ago in fact, a Reddit user by the name of Cantusfile. Full credit goes to him for the other descriptions, and I'll link his post in the description. As it turns out, Vaka the Maze Lord is named after Vaca Muerta, which is a geological formation in Argentina where meteorites were once found. The dual swords, Mbale the Acute, are named after a city in Uganda, which was also hit by a meteor shower in 1992. Cantusfile was unsure about Edward the Tremor, but theorised it could be named after Edward Charles Howard, a British chemist who, among other things, invented a vacuum pan that caramelised sugar at a more efficient rate, but more relevant to the topic, studied meteors, discovering types of iron that were not found on Earth. The switch axe, Oda the Conqueror, may have been named after 1144 Oda, an asteroid discovered in 1930. Oda Nobunaga was also the name of a famous Japanese daimyo in history, so another ruler. Adeli the Saviour was something else that I personally couldn't work out, but Cantusfile theorised it's named after a meteorite that landed in Antarctica. Robert the Vortex may refer to St. Robert, a meteorite that fell in Quebec, in an area of the same name. Yoichi the Sighted, like Oda the Conqueror, both refers to an asteroid and a Japanese historical figure. In this case, 5176 Yoichi, as well as Nasu no Yoichi, a samurai who was particularly skilled at archery, a perfect name for a bow. The insect glaive is called Self-Possession, breaking the trend. However, it was pointed out in the comments that the kinsect is actually named Abner the Marvel. Abner in this case was a great commander of King Saul's army, according to the Tanakh. Special thanks once again to Cantusfile and his work from 11 years back. It's really fun how Dalamadur's weapon descriptions naturally refer to him in the past tense and praise you for defeating him, so naturally they're named after either fallen rulers, in addition to long fallen meteors, which as we know are a key component of his fight. Would you believe that Shah Dalamadur's gear descriptions are even crazier? The Blade Master descriptions are prayers to the peerless star in the sky, the steep mountain above the earth, thriving tree beneath the sun, abundance lake, and finally, to the great pillar of the sky. Likewise, the gunner armor prays for similar things from similar sources, to let us return to them as the day ends, to bask in the life-giving sunset, to rest in the silence of dusk, to bask in the full moon, and for light to climb the night sky so we can reach tomorrow. And then there's the weapons. They're adjectives for Dalamadur. The Great Sword is the Dreaming Dalamadur, the Long Sword is the Clouded Dalamadur, Generous Dalamadur, Patient Dalamadur, Enraged Dalamadur. And as for the descriptions? With the first daybreak, Shah Dalamadur defined the earth by drawing the horizon. As sunshine came a second time, Shah Dalamadur created the fields with its feathery rays. Third came twilight, and Shah Dalamadur parted the golden waves and created land. With the fourth celestial glow, Shah Dalamadur bared his fangs and called it the wind. At the fifth evening glow, Shah Dalamadur created time and its coils from memory. With the sixth fall of darkness, Shah Dalamadur wrote joyous songs to heal our hearts. With the seventh deep night, Shah Dalamadur hewed mountains out of the darkness. With the eighth full moon, Shah Dalamadur created pillars upon which the earth would shake. Ninth came sunset, and Shah Dalamadur created heaven to catch the earth below. With the 10th heat haze, Shah Dalamadur invented fantasy to help us find reason. With the 11th night mist, Shah Dalamadur created the crucible of life. With the 12th midnight, Shah Dalamadur created a river of stars for the earth to admire. With the 13th shooting stars, Shah Dalamadur gouged out the caverns with his tail. And with the 14th sunrise, Shah Dalamadur created the light that begins everything. Dalamadur is an enigma. Initially believed to be a fairy tale, his existence was fully confirmed during the events of Monster Hunter 4 and Shah's sometime later, but much about him is still unknown, such as his diet. What does he eat? His teeth are sharp and his tongue can inflict paralysis, which implies he does go after living things. But who exactly? And then there's the question of his abilities. It's unclear what element his laser comprises. It doesn't set you on fire, nor does it inflict you with dragon blight. He spits out meteors from his mouth, but they also seemingly descend from the sky. He's clearly not spitting them out too. Where are they coming from? And then there's the matter of his day-to-day life. Where does he hang out? Speartip Crag is all carved out for a reason, but then you look at the curious crumbling appearance of Heaven's Mount, which is below the crag, and it's clear that this is his doing as well. And historically, other Dalamadurs have definitely left their marks on the world too. The Elder Crossing takes place every 50 years, where Elder Dragons travel to the Rotten Vale in the New World in order to die. This locale is filled with rotting corpses, in addition to creatures who have evolved to feast on them. But curiously, the entire place seems to comprise of Dalamadur corpses. You can see a skull of a long dead one in the distance, but as it turns out, his body also makes up much of the terrain, including the pathways. The whole locale is structured like a spiral because of the Dalamadur corpses. You can spot his signature spikes on the sides. It goes further, because at the bottom of the veil, you can find blue liquid that drains your health slowly by burning you, suspiciously similar to the fluid at Speartip Crag. You can even find unexploded meteors down here. Not only that, it has been confirmed that a Dalamadur carved out the Great Ravine, which is where Zorah Magdaros is initially fought in the story. You can also find the remains of another in the Guiding Lands. He's had a surprising legacy on the New World, but also the Forbidden Lands. Looking up from the Wounded Hollow reveals yet another Dalamadur skull, one whose body stretches all the way up to the Grand Hub. Despite being exclusive to battle in Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, Dalamadur's presence is definitely felt in later games. According to the director of 4 and 4 Ultimate, Konami Fujioka, Dalamadur was conceptualized because he wanted an extremely large monster, but he was aware that it would have to be more than that to be an interesting battle. So he and his team designed a giant snake-like monster that could change the terrain as it moved, shifting attacks depending on how he was wrapped around his arena. At his core, Dalamadur was designed to provide a multiplayer battle. The idea is that players would help each other by explaining strategies for dealing with his attacks, what to do in each stage, how to climb his head and more. He likens the Elder Dragon to Lao Shanlong and Jen Moran in that regard. Splitting the target camera in two between his head and tail was important in order to let players easily go for different parts, especially because they're often so far away. Other aspects of Dalamadur were also designed to promote the multiplayer experience. The meteors failing to explode meant situations could arise where you would call your friends over to mine for something rare. Dalamadur taking his time to start the laser was also purposeful, so that players could warn each other, which I personally find quite funny, because when I played 4 Ultimate, I had a shout out that said, "Get ready," for this exact situation, because not everyone knew it was coming. It did come in handy for other large scale fights too. According to Fujioka, Dalamadur's Japanese name, Dara Armadura, came from combining the Babylonian word for tower along with armadura, the Spanish word for armor. As for localization, the goal of Andrew Alfonso's team was to shorten the words. Dara Armadura was slightly long in English and would cause problems for materials. Eventually they settled on a romanized version, because Fujioka preferred sticking closer to the Japanese name, so Dalamadur stuck. As for the subspecies, because its title is Serpent Emperor Dragon, it gave them a lot of direct inspiration along with the red spikes. They played around with Sa, Imperial, before finally settling on Shah. Fujioka approved, so it became so. I talked about Dalamadur's ecology being rather vague and mysterious. This was intentional. Fujioka wanted us to wonder about who he was and where he came from. So, let's wonder. With the limited information we have, let's enter the speculation zone. Dalamadur carved up Heaven's Mount. He can shoot a mysterious element from his mouth. Several old Dalamadurs make up the entire Rotten Vale in the New World. His meteors are located there, still active. A Dalamadur is also in the Guiding Lands, the Wounded Hollow, and probably many other places too. Speartip Crag is located at the very top of Heaven's Mount, and is where we can find the living Dalamadur. But it's clear that many have spread across the lands, and likely form much of it. And the interesting thing is that no other final boss has this much presence across the series, despite him being introduced rather late. Sure, Fatalis appears a lot, but his legacy is limited to Castle Schwade. Sadius? Not really. Alatrion? No. Dalamadur, however, has made an appearance in both mainland games since 4. He is a significant monster. I'm just going to cut to it. In the 4th episode of this series, we discussed whether or not Nawa and Ibushi actually wanted to destroy the world, which was a pretty crazy discussion. Now, in episode 7, we will discuss a different crazy question surrounding another Elder Dragon. Is Dalamadur God? As in, is he some divine, albeit natural creator of the Monster Hunter world? Dalamadur's weapons and armor descriptions refer to him as some kind of deity, which isn't uncommon for the gear of Elder Dragons, but Shah's weapons all detail the story of the world's creation and have him behind it all. His armor alludes to it as well, but obviously those are just descriptions and probably definitely shouldn't be taken at face value. But then you take into account his appearance in Monster Hunter World, as well as other revelations. Dalamadur corpses form an entire locale. You can see his face on the map. Monster Hunter World explains that monsters contain certain amounts of bioenergy that they can release upon death. Elder Dragons in particular contain a lot, and Zorah Magdaros could have obliterated the entire continent upon death. And in the past, we know a different Zorah Magdaros' death was able to form the basis of the Guiding Lands, a massive island comprising many different biomes, an entire localized ecosystem. Dalamadur likely has similar amounts in his body, so in theory, his death could do the same thing. Maybe he is in some way responsible for huge parts of the natural world ending up the way they are, even if, in many cases, his remains are no longer visible. The idea of Dalamadur being responsible for the creation of at least huge portions of the world does potentially answer an interesting question, in the sense we don't really know how the Monster Hunter world came to be. A lot of fictional settings have these creation stories, such as Zelda with the Golden Goddesses, the Triforce and Hyrule, or that leaked charts from Pokemon that had Arceus at the centre of everything. The closest thing Monster Hunter has is the Tale of the Five. If you were to take it at face value and assign the roles of the 5 dragons to others, Dalamadur curiously doesn't fit any of the bills. The dragon that sank into the land and became the sea is probably Zorah Magdaros. The dragon that became the mountains could be Dalamadur, but is more likely Shara Ishvalda. And currently, there's no real dead ringers for the forest or the lake. The Sapphire Star is all but likely to be Zeno or Safi Jiva. Yet despite being an extremely significant Elder Dragon, Dalamadur is nowhere to be found, despite him also being present in Monster Hunter World. Again, this all requires that we take Tale of the Five at face value, or assume that it's all true within Monster Hunter. Maybe it's a metaphor for something, but much of it does ring true, particularly the supposed Zorah Magdaros description. This is literally something he did. So what if Dalamadur's role is bigger than that? What if he somehow precedes the other dragons? I decided to go the extra mile and even read item descriptions. Most of them are standard, strong Elder Dragon stuff, but his high and G-rank gems are very illuminating. The Skyblade Dragon's Fire is described as a gem to reforge the world, from blood, the sea, from flesh, the land, and from bone, the wood. In other words, even if you don't take it literally, it's still drawing parallels between Dalamadur and the cycle of creation and destruction, posing the idea that while he does carve up entire mountains, his body will still end up forming a lot of the world. But then the regular Skyblade gem has this description: a gem that forms a new star from the Great Snake's life at the apocalypse. That forms a new star from the Great Snake's life. Who do we know that is compared to a star? Zeno and Safi Jiva. And then I look at Zeno Jiva. Why is he the same colour as Dalamadur's lasers? In addition to his heat aura, meteors, even the blue liquid to an extent. What on earth is going on there? Again, taking at face value, I love that phrase, could you assume the Jivas were initially born mostly from Dalamadur's life energy? They did absorb energy in the New World for possibly centuries, and multiple Dalamadurs do make up a huge part of the New World. Could Dalamadur be something of a progenitor dragon in that sense? And it would make sense why he wasn't in the Tale of the Five. He was what the Sapphire Star came from, maybe even the others, so he likely preceded them all. As the descriptions read, he might literally be the beginning. Granted, Xenojiva's energy is stated to be pure bioenergy that he absorbed. It's likely that Dalamadur's element is bioenergy as well, although that is significant in of itself. Bioenergy was a major part of Monster Hunter World, and it was treated as a new concept, yet our first introduction to the concept could have been through Dalamadur. It's also speculated in universe that Xenojiva arrived to the New World after the Dalamadurs, although his own origin is still mysterious. Either way, this is all mostly speculation. I don't know if all this is actually true, but it might be why Dalamadur is still so mysterious compared to every other Elder Dragon, even the other final bosses. Dalamadur is functionally a set-piece battle. While most monsters are straightforward enemies that move around the locales and jump around you and the arena, Dalamadur is the arena, literally sometimes. When you think back to prior colossal set pieces in the series, Lao Shanlung, Shen Gaoren, or the Morans might come to mind. I made a video about all of them a couple of years ago. They too are battles defined by their stages. Lao and Shen travel through the fortress, the Morans are fighting against your ship. In those fights, you have to protect parts of the stage, but here, Dalamadur is the stage, and is actively destroying it. The fight is rather scripted and in interesting ways. For example, if Dalamadur needs to trigger an event, such as destroying Spire 2, he'll rush back and reset to position 1. However, he won't stay there long and will immediately move to position 2, but then he'll speed past that and dive down to trigger the sequence. This is because he doesn't actually have an animation for heading below the arena when in position 1. He also can't go back to position 1 without heading below the crag. This doesn't show well in the footage I'm presenting, but Fujioka and co did succeed in making a solid multiplayer battle. At every single position, there are multiple points for players to attack. Dalamadur's idle animations are also simple, so if you know what you're doing, sniping his head with greatsword strikes can be a huge boon too. Most of all, it's fantastic how he has so many different parts breaks, both claws, his tail, his head twice, his back spikes. It incentivizes you to fight all over his body at every chance you get. But the fight does have problems. For one, it becomes rather monotonous as time goes on. For the footage I'm showing you, I fought the HR100 Dalamadur, and it took me 27 minutes. For a full party, I imagine it's closer to 15 or so. But either way, Dalamadur's moveset pool is not massive, nor does it really expand as the fight goes on. Many monsters in these games get stronger in later stages of the battle. Dalamadur gets the super laser and heat aura, but in other ways he becomes less capable due to destroying Spire 2, which takes away a huge part of the fight. The idea of Dalamadur destroying the arena to make things trickier for you is really fun. Like him carving the gorge makes reaching Spire 2 a little trickier, since you now have to clear a jump and climb a wall. If more of the changes were like that, the fights could be much more interesting. Ultimately, because Dalamadur's entire moveset is designed around Speartip Crag, a lot of the flaws are because of the arena structure. Changing it could provide him with new angles to attack and other ways to change the flow of battle as he destroys more and more of it. If Dalamadur were to return in, say, the Wilds expansion or a future game, there's a few things I would want to be different. For one, I would say he needs better phases. Dalamadur's phase 3 is just him hanging in position 2 until the end of the fight, with no more shifts. I find that a bit dull. Not to mention the phase 2 shift happens really early, which means you've been listening to the same music for some time. A more defined phase 3, as well as some more phase music, maybe proof of a hero or something unique, would make the fights a lot more interesting. Ultimately, you would need a different arena. I'm thinking of Gogmazios and Wilds here, but if a new Speartip Crag was bigger, and then split into 2 different zones, you could have Dalamadur carve away significant chunks to alter the layout to greater degrees than the original, like carving wood. It would allow for more fight, position and phase variety. Dalamadur unlocking at least 2 new positions during the fight and forcing you to learn new attacks and angles could be pretty good. Something that does bother me in the original fight is the meteor spam. It can be a lot and can really take you out when you're not totally ready for them. On the other hand, they are a necessary evil as they give you something to dodge while Dalamadur is moving. plus the Shattered Omen aspect. I think for that reason they have to stay, but it would be really nice if there was something else to do while Dalamadur is moving. For example, if his actual movements were faster but more dangerous, and there were different kinds of safe spots and danger zones you had to be aware of. Or if there was a weapon similar to Gog that you had to charge up mid-fight, like let's say there is a Convergent Elder Breaker in the new Dalamadur arena. What if you had to drag cables from every single corner while evading Dala's wide-reaching attacks and meteors? That could be fun, like a long-term project throughout the fight. Speaking of long-term projects, we've discussed some shortcomings with Dalamadur's fight and ways they could improve for his return. But that's assuming Dalamadur will return. We know he continues to remain in the minds of the developers, as shown by his various cameos, but those are static background details. Implementing him as a living, breathing monster to battle is much harder, especially compared to the 3DS era. Perhaps you all may have noticed, but since World, Monster Hunter games don't tend to have many giant colossal set-piece monsters anymore, with their own bespoke arenas and special mechanics. We do get to fight massive elder dragons in special arenas sometimes, such as with Elatreon or Fatalis, but they're not the same as, say, Darren Moran or Shen Gaoren, who were much more scripted, much more unique, and were in their respective games at launch. In fact, Monster Hunter 4 at launch had Darren Moran, Akantor, Dalamadur, Fatalis and Crimson Fatalis, or Portable Third, which had Gen Moran, Elatreon, Amatsu, Akantor and Yukanlos. Either one or more colossal set pieces as well as large boss monsters, all with their own bespoke arenas. Compare that to World, which only had Zorah Magdaros as a colossal set piece, as well as Xenojiva as a large boss, or Rise, which only had Ibushi, Nawa and the All-Mother, and no colossal set piece battles. This is due to the heightened production values and costs of the newer games. All these fights are much harder to include today. Fatalis and Iceborne may not have been in the game at launch, but it does show. His fight is so much more robust than every prior iteration, and this goes for a lot of other returning large bosses. This is why he took so long. He was a challenge to implement, and the challenges are even bigger for the colossal set pieces. The difficulty of creating these colossal set pieces comes down to how many new assets have to be created for them that can't really be used for anyone else. It makes them harder to create, but also harder to justify from a pragmatic point of view. The only major colossal set piece we've had in recent years was Zorah Magdaros. He had the longest development time of any monster ever and didn't really turn out great. All this effort for one of the most boring fights in the series, because these larger scale monsters are also really tough to nail. Dalamadur is the embodiment of this issue. He consists entirely of bespoke assets, and the developers would have to ensure maximum value is extracted from them. A custom arena would need to be created, and based on how Dalamadur is, it would likely be only for him. No reusing the Rhyme Chain Peak this time. They'd have to remake Dalamadur's model in high definition. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that image showing how Gogmazio's in Wilds has the vertices of 70 Sunbreak Malzenos. Dalamadur is magnitudes bigger. You'd have to count him using Gogmazio's. On the 3DS, it was okay to skip out on finer details when necessary, but that won't fly on modern systems with high definition visuals. It goes without saying, but Dalamadur needs new animations for moving around, attacking, any potential new mechanics, and because of the type of dragon he is, the animations would have to be entirely new and only for him. In other words, bespoke. No other Elder Dragon can really use them. A huge part of the original fight involved the hunters being able to run across Dalamadur and climb on his head. This mechanic does not yet exist in Wilds, with the exception of corpses, so they'd have to implement that here. And of course, just like with every other major returning boss, update the fight in ways that make him much more robust and impressive than he was on the 3DS, which is an immense task. In other words, he's extremely expensive to produce. Perhaps he'd be easier for the developers than Zorah, as they have something to shoot for already, but that would be a massive undertaking. I mentioned how they'd have to extract the maximum amount of value from him. What did I mean by that? My thinking is that Dalamadur is extremely difficult to bring back, to the point that if the developers managed to do so, they would have to make it into a massive event, something that we'd be greatly encouraged to battle as many times as possible. The reason many larger bosses end up as title updates isn't just for additional development time, but because title updates serve partly to draw new players towards the game or bring returning hunters back. In other words, they're marketing pushes. They're often tough endgame challenges and or grinding events that players can fight many different times, which provides a lengthy, memorable experience and thus justifies the cost entirely. I liken it to Final Fantasy VII versus its remake. The original game used 2D images for the most part to represent its world and towns, which made it pretty easy to present a massive world on the PlayStation. Remake, however, went for modern visuals, real-time combat, and full 3D environments. These are so much more expensive to make that not only did the entire project have to be split into 3 games, but much of the original story has been stretched to properly use each area. A 5-minute segment in the original game is now 1 or more hours, because the developers spent so long creating these environments that it would be a waste for players to sprint through them. Gogmazio's in Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate was a large-scale fight in a custom arena. He was probably pricier than the other monsters, but not by much, and as such, he's allowed to exist in the game as yet another fairly standard large boss. However, in Wilds, not only has he cost much more to produce with his new detailed model, new attack animations, massive multi-stage bespoke arena, but he's also a post-launch free title update. The amount of effort would be a waste if players only fought him a few times for his gear and never again. So to counter that, he's been tied to the Arteon weapon system. Now players have incentives to fight him a great many times, which means this expensive boss fight the developers have painstakingly designed will be fully experienced, and thus a worthwhile addition to the game. The value extraction was true for bespoke content in the older games, only they often did it by repurposing the content for other fights. Lao has a reskinned subspecies in the form of Ashen Lao, and later Shen Gaoren roams the same fortress. Jen Moran's assets in Tri were cleverly remixed for Darren Moran in Monster Hunter 4. And yes, Dalamadur did get a subspecies too, in order to provide a familiar, yet different experience for the expansion. For the amount of work that would have to be done, and bespoke assets created, in order to reimagine Dalamadur in a modern game, I think they would have to do a lot to make sure players got the maximum amount of value from him. Bare minimum he'd be a siege battle, perhaps where there's multiple stages of his arena, with different battle phases, and the latter ones only unlock on later quest attempts. He would have to be a giant event too. Judging by Gogmazio's, I think this could be where they finally pull the trigger on a bigger hunting party of real players in a fight, perhaps 8. I also have to note how they've been bringing back Legacy 4 Ultimate characters for pivotal moments, such as Fabius with Magala and Nadia with Gogmazio's. Julius, I'm sure, will return someday. And really, what better monster candidate is there for him? I don't know when we'll see Dalamadur again, living Dalamadur that is. I think the developers definitely want to include him, and I suspect there's a lot of long-term story implications of his existence that haven't fully been dived into. But it seems that will be such an undertaking that I will be legitimately shocked if we do see him soon. Dalamadur placed 29th on the Hunter's Choice poll, in between Gogmazio's and Amatsu. Shah Dalamadur placed at 65th place, after Puke, but before Dread King Rathalos. In many ways, Dalamadur is the perfect final boss for Monster Hunter 4. This game heavily expanded our movement capabilities, which allowed for faster climbing and overall vertical traversal. So the fact that this fight is all about moving around, climbing, and jumping ends up working really well. A boss like this couldn't have really worked in the older games. Dalamadur is pretty special to me. As many of you all know, Monster Hunter 4 was my first game, and I went in mostly blind. It was a solid experience in its own right, but for the Nintendo 3DS it felt like a premium experience. There weren't that many games on the system that had 3D action combat with a controllable camera like this, with multiplayer on top of that as well. So it was a pretty crazy experience to see monsters like Rathalos, Magala, but also Darren Moran, and then capping it off with this guy and his unexpected subspecies. For a system like the 3DS, a boss this massive and this interactive felt impossible, a wonderful technological showcase. I think that, more than anything, is what would be hard to recapture for Dalamadur in a newer game. He felt far bigger than the 3DS itself, even compared to set pieces in other 3DS games. On the PS5, that aura is diminished unless they make some serious adjustments. I do wonder when we'll get another large-scale monster battle again. The fact Zorah was the last one, and was so obviously developmentally troubled, doesn't bode well for them as a concept. You can sort of see Rampages as an attempt to recreate the sheer scale of those battles, but in a more cost-effective form, and even that didn't go so well. It's funny how I bring up Zorah. It's as if the developers tried to simply continue what they were doing on the Wii and 3DS, and casually include a colossal set piece once again. It didn't work out well, and they haven't tried since. Another example of this happening is evolving weapon designs. If you've kept up with the series, you might remember certain monsters getting upgraded visible designs later in their trees, mostly in the 3DS games. They tried it once more in World, and it resulted in them running out of time, and us being left with the bone or iron for a good chunk of them, and like the colossal set pieces, they never tried it again. Dalamadur has that final boss legacy going for him at least, and I think that his supposed relative importance in Monster Hunter's lore and legacy means the developers do want to bring him back. It's just a matter of time, cost, and opportunity. So far they brought back Fatalis, Alatreon, Amatsu and Gogmazios. As such, they skipped the Black and White's god, the Underwater Dragons and Dalamadur. A Kansor and Yukanlos we'll absolutely see before long. I'm kind of shocked they weren't in Rise. The Underwater Dragons haven't come back for self-explanatory reasons, which leaves Dalamadur. Considering Konami Fujioka led development on the team that created him, and Yuya Tokuda has led development on the games that keep bringing him back as locale cameos, they definitely have an interest. Only time will tell. This concludes the first season of Monster Hunter Compendium. There are 7 episodes total. Initially I planned for 8, but after the year-long break, I cut one out for reasons that may become clear later. I enjoyed making this series quite a bit, and it has given me new opportunities to learn more about the games and figure more stuff out from a video perspective. I would say that the trickiest part is, without a doubt, the gear section. Less so for World and Rise, but definitely the case with the older games, and it's something I may have to reduce for future episodes. Speaking of, the series will continue. Monster Hunter Evolution was good, but its conception as a weekly series essentially limited the format for 45 episodes. Compendium is much more complex, multifaceted, and flexible, which allows for each episode to sort of turn into a review of sorts on the monster, which can be really fun to make. The structure particularly shines when the monster has something really interesting going on, or is rather controversial. You should consider this season to be partly a look back at some underappreciated monsters, but also something of a Monster Hunter Wilds wishlist, since it was conceived long before the game came out. Out of the monsters covered, technically Gaoren and the original episode 7 subject made it in, while Celtus, Agnacta, Almudron and Ouroboros are nowhere to be seen. Oh yeah, Dalamadur's there too. The second season will actually have a unique theme, and will enter production later this year. In the meantime, I have something else planned, and you'll find out what that is soon enough. Thank you for watching this video, and thank you for your patience as you waited over a year for this series to conclude. Please look forward for future episodes and other videos. Remember to like, comment and subscribe, and have a good day.